6 weeks ago, we jumped into a series called The Land of Promise, and it has turned out to be more challenging and convicting to me than I could have ever imagined. So we're going to dive in today. Today's actually going to be the closing message for this series, and I'm going to be right up front with where we're going. I'm going to ask you today. We're going to create an opportunity. We're going to create a moment where we can respond and make a commitment. Anybody freaked out yet? You say commitment, and as a pastor says commitment, everybody kind of like, okay, grab on. What's happening? But really, I want to really invite you to make a commitment in your life to serve the Lord. And I want to provide an opportunity for this today. And so I'm going to just share with you early on, like, life happens, life gets going. Like, maybe one time you were serving the Lord and then you withdrew, and all this happens. But as people of God, as followers of Christ, we are called to be servants. And I'm going to really ask you to make a commitment to serve today, to be a servant. And so as we go through this message, I'm going to just be encouraging you to be processing this and thinking about it in terms of, like, what does it look like in your life? What does it look like to be a servant where you are, with what context God has placed you in? Are you with me? We've gone through a lot of things in this series. We started off by talking about, in the land of promise, talking about how God led his people out of slavery, of bondage, of oppression, and now they're in the wilderness, and he's providing manna. But the goal wasn't to stay in the wilderness and continue to eat manna. You with me? Like, the goal was, the manna was a temporary nourishment to get them into the land that God promised them to enter. And so we talked about, like, what does this look like? Beyond the wilderness was the title of the first message we did, and we just discussed, like, what does it look like to go beyond the wilderness? And the appeal there is so many of us are stuck in the wilderness. We've settled for where we are. We've settled for status quo. We've just stopped in life. We refuse to accept that there might be more out there that God has for us. We just kind of settle down. And God's purpose, and God was calling Israel, his people, not to stay in the wilderness, but to trust him and to continue the journey. And that challenged me, because I started looking at, like, what's the wilderness in my own life? Where have I settled? Where have I kind of stopped short of where God is calling me to be? And then we talked about, Newbin shared a message about Gideon, and I love this message. I mean, Gideon has this huge army, and God actually takes them from over 30,000 people to 300 people, because he wants them to be successful in the battle that he has for them, but he doesn't want them to think that they did it by their own strength. Any of us feel like you don't have what it takes to accomplish what God is calling you into, and he's like, no, this is your strength, your talents, your abilities aren't what's required. It's just our obedience that God uses. And then we had a pastor friend of mine, one of our church planting pastors in Eaton Rapids, Randy, came and he talked about patience, and sometimes you're in the wilderness for a long time, and we're not called to just wait passively, but we're called to be faithful and continue to be faithful and continue to be faithful, like Israel was, because it took them 40 years to enter the promised land. And then we talked about the sin of Achan. Achan was selfish, and he ruined things for the community around him because of his selfishness. And today the message is that this is the title: Who will you serve? And I want us to really think about this, man. Like, I went through a journey this week, even preparing for this message, and really coming to a place in my own life. I'm like, who am I serving? It's funny, I had a conversation with someone this morning. I walked in and we just started talking about this, and I kind of was just having this conversation about what it's like to serve and what it's like to continually serve and the kinds of hurdles and challenges and maybe even selfishness that can creep in while you're serving, and this tendency that we can have to like stop serving, stop giving. I just got to say that I am so thankful for those of you who serve around here. You're not serving me, you're serving Christ, but you're serving Christ by serving one another. Whether you're on the worship team and you're giving your time and your passion and your talents to serving in that way, maybe it's the tech team. I could go through all the different areas that people serve around this church, whether it's cleaning. Maybe you serve in children's ministry and you're just participating and trying to raise up the next generation. That matters. That's important. Oh man, like maybe it's first impressions and you're just setting a culture or environment when people come on Sunday morning, we're just trying to provide a context that's loving and embracing and caring. Maybe you're picking weeds outside the building that nobody knows, because I know one of you showed up a couple weeks back and we're picking weeds, and I can't figure out who it is, but I'm going to find out. This morning I'm pulling up to the building, and I noticed that somebody parks way down there. Some of you park way down there, and you're serving by parking far away so that other people can have closer parking spots. That's awesome. And we look around and it's like, man, there's just so many ways that people serve around here. And I want to revisit this and really ask ourselves this question: who will you serve? So if you have a Bible, I'd encourage you to turn to Joshua 24. I'm not going to put the whole scripture passage up on the screen, so we're not going to do this yet, Robbie, because there's some context to this. Joshua chapter 24 is the last chapter in the book of Joshua, and this is the last thing that he says before he dies. And so if you know Joshua's journey, just a little bit of context, Joshua was part of the people of God while they were in Egypt, while they were in slavery, and then he was under Moses' reign or rule while they crossed the Red Sea and when they went into the wilderness, and Moses groomed Joshua to be the leader. So when Moses died, Joshua took over and led the people into the promised land. So Joshua has seen all this stuff. He's seen people go into rebellion. He's seen people turn away from the Lord. He was there when Moses went up on the mountain and then came down with the 10 Commandments. Like God spoke to Moses, Joshua was there, and he was among the people as they're looking to this golden calf, this idol. So Joshua has seen all this. And they crossed the Jordan, they entered the promised land, and battle after battle after battle, they were with God, and God was with them as they took land. As they took the land that was promised to them so long ago. Joshua reaches the very end of his life. And if you could say one thing, if you were never going to see anybody in your life again, and you were going to say one thing, that's what Joshua says in Joshua chapter 24. This is it. He knows he's at the end of his life. He's like, man, he wants Israel, he wants the people of God just to know one thing. And I'm not going to go there yet, Robbie, but he starts, and he says he assembled all the tribes together, all the people. He assembles them together, and they presented themselves before God. And then he says to all the people, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, long ago your ancestors lived beyond the Euphrates and worshiped other gods. Do you remember this? Like Abraham? Abraham was living in this land, and he was called out of this land, and he didn't know where he was going to go. And so Joshua is reminding them of the story. He was reminding them of this greater story that they were a part of. He's reminding them of the history and all that God did up to this point. He talks about Jacob and Esau. He says that Jacob and his family went down to Egypt. Then God says he sent Moses and Aaron, and the Egyptians were afflicted. He brought them out of Egypt, out of the sea. Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea. But they cried to the Lord for help. He put darkness between them. He basically delivered them from the Egyptians. So he led Abraham out of this land. They were worshiping foreign gods. He led them into this new land. Then the people found themselves in slavery and captivity from the Egyptians. And Joshua was like, but remember, you didn't stay in slavery. God delivered you from slavery. He brought you out of that. And then you went into the wilderness. He brought you to the land of the Amorites, east of the Jordan. They talked about God's reminding them, like, people were attacking you, but I gave them to you. I gave you their land. Then you crossed the Jordan, you went into Jericho, and he's reminding them how they went from the wilderness to the promised land. And Joshua is saying, remember this journey we've been on. How can you forget this journey that God has brought you on? God says, so I gave you a land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build, and you live in them and eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. God is reminding them, I have provided for you. I brought you out of your comfort zone. I delivered you from slavery and bondage and oppression. I was with you in the wilderness. You didn't stay in the wilderness. I brought you into this land of promise. And now I've given you an inheritance. And this is what Joshua says, and this is on the screen. God finishes speaking to the people. Joshua says, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself this day who you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But Joshua says, but as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Amen. Then the people answered, far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. It was the Lord our God himself who brought us and our parents out of Egypt from the land of slavery and performed these great signs before our eyes. He protected us on our entire journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites who live in the land. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God. This is the people responding to what Joshua is calling them to serve the Lord. And the people are affirming, yeah, God did do these mighty things. We will serve the Lord. Joshua turns and says to the people, you're not able to serve the Lord. He's holy. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end of you after he has been good to you. He's saying, look what God has done up to this point. He's brought them out of this land. He's delivered them from slavery. He's provided. He's now given them an inheritance. If you turn back from this relationship, God's favor will withdraw from you, and you will have to experience the consequences of that. But the people said to Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. This is the second time they say this. Then Joshua said, you're witnesses against yourself that you've chosen to serve the Lord. And they said, yes, we are witnesses. Now then, said Joshua, throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the Lord said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God and obey him. The third time they say that. On that day, Joshua made a covenant for the people. And there at Shechem, he reaffirmed for them the decrees and laws. He recorded these things in the book of the law of God. He took a large stone and set it up there under the oak near the holy place of the Lord. See, he said to all the people, this stone will be a witness against us. It has heard all the words the Lord has said to us. It will be a witness against you if you are untrue to your God. Then Joshua dismissed the people, and they all went back to their own inheritance. This is a fascinating story. Joshua is at the end of his life. He's reminding everybody, remember, this is what a relationship with God is like. He brings you out of your comfort zone. He delivers you from slavery, oppression, bondage. He provides for you in the wilderness. He tries to call you to center your hearts on him. He leads you into this new land, this new inheritance. He's giving you an inheritance. He is giving you. Remember what this relationship is like. And uphold your part of the relationship. Serve him. You with me? Are you with me? Remember everything he's done. And as a response, serve him. And the people say this 3 times. And they're like, yeah, we are witnesses against ourselves. If we, basically like, we're going to hold ourselves accountable. Like if we turn away, we're going to notice. But you know what else he says? This is this weird thing. There's a rock involved. He takes a rock, symbolizing the land that they have now inherited. He takes this rock and says, let the ground itself, let this land itself bear witness. Let not just us, let's not just hold ourselves accountable, but let the gifts and the inheritance that God has provided for us, let this bear witness so that we would never turn back from our ways. The Lord has led them, and they want the land to hold them accountable. So yesterday, I dug a rock out of a field. No joke. I don't know whose farmer's field I took this from. The whole time, I'm thinking, why a rock? Why a rock? And I'm thinking, man, the nation of Israel was in the promised land. And oftentimes they would use a representative of a symbol of the whole. And so what they're saying is, man, may this ground, the place that God has put us in, hold us accountable to this relationship that we have with our God. Like may everything, like God has provided for us. He's given us an inheritance. He's done something in our lives. May our inheritance hold us accountable. Maybe we continually be reminded that we will serve him. We will uphold our end of the relationship. Like, listen, God's love isn't dependent upon what we can do. I clarified this a couple weeks ago. I got to say it again. Like, God doesn't not love us if we don't serve him. He doesn't withdraw his love. He loves, he cares. He is there. He is faithful. But our works are serving him. Us serving him, our service is an expression of our relationship. It's like once we acknowledge how good God is and how much he loves us, we want to serve him. We want to hold up our end of the relationship. We don't just find ourselves entitled. We're grateful. May everything that God has done in our life remind us of this relationship that we have with him. When I first started in ministry, when I first started serving the Lord, you serve. And I can't tell you how good it feels to serve the Lord, because you're thinking and you're doing things that are bigger than yourself. It's like this selfless act where you're like, I'm going to serve the Lord. And then I'm going to serve the Lord. And I'm going to serve the Lord. And there's this, I don't know what it's like. It just feels good to serve the Lord. It's like, man, this is selfless. I'm participating in what Jesus himself did. He served. He washed feet. The disciples are like, man, I want to be first. He's like, if you want to be first, become the last. I want to be the greatest, they'd say. Well, then you must become the least. He'd get down on his hands and knees and he'd wash their feet, proving to them, showing them this is what it's like to be a servant. And so I'd serve the Lord, and I'd serve the Lord, and it felt good. It was almost like there's kind of an exchange that takes place, like I serve the Lord, and then I feel good. But something happens where you're serving the Lord, and you're serving the Lord, and you're serving the Lord, and the shininess and the sexiness wears off. It doesn't feel as good as it used to. That person bothers you. There's conflict and there's drama, and I'm going to serve the Lord. But the exchange doesn't happen like it once did, right? It doesn't feel as good as it used to. It turns into, I'm going to serve the Lord. It turns into obligation. It turns into, oh, I got to do this. Oh, I got to take time out of my schedule. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? And I don't know about you, but in my life, serving the Lord started out, and it was beautiful, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is bigger than myself. But I realize now that I was getting something from it. It was making me feel good. And when the feel good wears off, the question I'm asking is, am I going to continue to serve the Lord? Maybe it's hard. Maybe you don't like the people you're around. Maybe there's drama. Maybe you're annoyed. Maybe your mind, your eyes start looking to other things that are just more enticing than serving the Lord. Maybe you look to your friends or your family or people in the community, and you're like, man, they're not serving the Lord. They seems like they're having fun. It seems like they're acquiring wealth and things, and they're having a good time. And like, man, am I? You ever hear like, am I wasting my time here? Because I'm not getting what I used to be getting from this thing. And you start contemplating altogether, like maybe I just stopped serving. Or maybe you think, man, I want to serve. Why am I not being successful? Why am I not gaining traction or credibility? I just keep serving, and maybe you think because you've served for so long, you kind of have earned something, like tenure. You know what I'm saying? Look what I've been doing this whole time. I've been doing all this. So now I get some power, and I get control, and I get to share my preferences, and I get to stop being a servant, basically, and start getting things my way. Somebody should listen to me because look at everything that I've done. All these are indicators that you have gone from serving the Lord to serving yourself. And how many people in the church, man, they're serving, the sexiness wears off, and they either stop serving altogether or they try to serve in order to get something. It's like they serve and they're leveraging their service with some kind of control, strings attached. I get it. That was what I was having a conversation this morning with. After a while, serving, you think it should go somewhere. You think it should earn you something or contribute to something. And when you give your life to service in this way, there's a point where you come back to Joshua 24 and you look at what he's saying. And his greatest desire for people was to continue to serve the Lord. And he makes a commitment himself. he says, if it's desirable to you, serve the Lord. But he goes further than that. He says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He basically says, y'all can do what you want, but I'm going to center myself and extend my influence to myself and for my family as much as I can, and I'm going to serve the Lord. I'm going to uphold my end of this relationship with God. I'm going to respond to the Lord's love in this way. I'm going to give myself, my life, my inheritance to him. It's an unpopular message in the church today. Because so many people, it's like, what can I get out of this? Or we like the shininess or the sexiness of serving, but when that disappears, it's like, yeah, I'm going to walk away altogether. It's not good for... Do you want success or do you want to serve? And I think the problem is everybody wants to be a saint, but so few saints want to serve. You know? Am I speaking truth to anybody? Does this convict anybody? I mean, I'm challenged. I'm convicted by this. And I look at Jesus, the greatest example of a servant that I can think of, that exists. And I wonder how, if I want serving to be appealing to me, to feel good to me, I wonder if Jesus was expecting the same thing. Can you imagine him serving to feel good? I wonder if the nails would have gone in his hands and the crown that was placed upon his head. He was serving. He wasn't serving to try to feel good. He was serving out of love. He was giving himself to others. I mean, they put a crown on his head, and the thorns of that crown lodged itself between his skin and his skull. Did that feel good? I mean, if I'm looking at the picture of a suffering servant, and I'm looking at Jesus, and I'm like, man, I need to become a servant. It's a commitment I got to make. This is who I'm following. This is Jesus. I can't be concerned about what I can get. I can't be concerned about my success. I can't be concerned about power or control. No, I just have to give myself as a servant. I think that's what Joshua's desire was for the people of God. He dismissed the people. And now, at this point in the story, all the people had, or most of the people had inheritance. They had land that they had inherited. So the promised land is this vast area. And all the different tribes were able to have different land, different inheritances. And so when Joshua dismissed the people, they all went back to their own inheritance. Verse 29, he says, after these things, Joshua, he refers to him as the servant of the Lord. He died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance. In verse 31, it says, Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the lifetime of the elders who outlived him, who had experienced everything that God did for Israel. Joshua faithfully, not perfectly, faithfully led these people all these years, and his greatest desire at the end of his life, he was calling them, recognize all that God has done and commit yourself to serving him. So this is the commitment that I want you to make today. This is the commitment that I'm inviting you to make. We're going to have just an opportunity where we commit to being a servant. Not trying to get something, not trying to leverage something, not trying to get our way or control or all that stuff, preferences. I'm just saying, no. Sometimes we just got to clear the slate and say, Lord, I'm going to be your servant. I'm going to use everything that you've given me. I'm going to use my time, my talents, my treasures. I'm going to use everything, my inheritance. I'm going to use everything to serve you. I think God has placed opportunities right in front of us. In a second, when the worship team comes back up, I'm going to put this rock over here. And there's Sharpie markers. And this is what I'm going to encourage you to do. If a representative from each family to come up and sign this rock, saying, no, the land's going to hold me accountable. I'm going to commit to serving the Lord. And so if you're single, sign the rock. If you're a spouse, maybe with your spouse, one of you sign the rock.